3 nights a week, Emma vanished for study sessions, returning at 3 a.m. reeking of wine. Honestly, I thought she was just nerding out like the rest of us who binge documentaries until dawn. When I offered to bring them dinner, she got defensive and said it would be distracting. After about 6 weeks of this routine, I decided to show up unannounced at his apartment to surprise him with snacks. What I found wasn't studying. She came stumbling out of his bedroom, wearing nothing but his oversized shirt while he stood there in boxers looking like he'd seen a ghost. Turns out, some people take a very hands-on approach to professional development. The art of academic deception. The art of academic deception requires careful planning, and Emma had clearly done her homework on crafting believable lies. She had landed a position at a marketing firm and suddenly developed an intense passion for professional development, announcing she was finally taking her career seriously. After 2 years of dating, Jake was genuinely proud when Emma first mentioned these study sessions with Marcus, a senior analyst who had apparently passed the same certification 2 years earlier. Emma's setup was flawless from the beginning. She mentioned specific modules the certification covered and swore she had Marcus's exclusive calendar of study sessions mapped out through November. She talked about how intimidating the material was and how grateful she felt to have found someone willing to help her navigate the complex curriculum. Everything about her explanation screamed legitimate professional development. Jake was so focused on being the supportive boyfriend that he missed some fairly obvious inconsistencies right from the start. Emma had never shown much interest in analytics before, but when Jake mentioned this observation, Emma explained that the industry was evolving and marketing professionals needed to become more technically proficient to stay competitive. She was just adapting to market demands. The study schedule seemed unusually rigid for someone juggling a full-time job. Emma would leave their apartment every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 7 in the evening, plus one weekend session that rotated between Saturday and Sunday afternoons. She carried a small backpack with notebooks and pens, occasionally bringing her laptop for what she called practice exercises. The consistency impressed Jake initially. The more Jake thought about it, the more questions started forming. Why did these sessions always happen at Marcus's apartment instead of a neutral location like the office conference room or local library? Emma's explanation was that Marcus had invested in specialized reference books and industry reports that were too expensive for her to buy individually. Apparently, his place was so quiet, focused, and replete with rare textbooks it made the library feel like a theme park. Jake's first real moment of doubt came during week 3 when Emma returned from a study session looking unusually relaxed for someone who had just spent 4 hours cramming certification material. She seemed almost groggy, like she had taken a nap rather than engaging in intensive learning. When Jake asked how the session went, Emma gave vague responses about covering client lifecycle management and advanced segmentation strategies without providing any specific details about what she had actually learned. The timeline also raised questions Jake initially dismissed as overthinking. Emma claimed the certification exam was scheduled for late fall, giving her roughly 4 months to prepare. That meant 16 weeks of preparation for a professional certification, with sessions lasting 3 to 4 hours each. Jake had taken several IT certifications for his own career, and none had required anywhere near that amount of guided study time. Emma's behavior during study weeks versus non-study weeks also showed subtle but noticeable patterns. On weeks when she had multiple sessions scheduled, she seemed more energetic and paid extra attention to her appearance. She would spend longer getting ready, choose more flattering outfits, and sometimes even wear perfume to evening study sessions. When Jake jokingly asked if she was trying to impress her study partner, Emma laughed it off and said she just felt more confident when she looked professional. The academic charade had actually been building for nearly 2 months before Jake started connecting the dots. Emma had begun mentioning Marcus casually in conversations back in June, describing him as this brilliant senior analyst who really understood the industry. She would reference his insights during their dinner conversations and quote his advice about navigating office politics. Looking back, Jake realized Emma had been laying the groundwork for the study session story long before she officially announced her certification plans. What made the deception even more suspicious was Emma's insistence that Jake could never meet Marcus. When Jake suggested grabbing drinks with him sometime, Emma explained that Marcus preferred to keep work and personal life completely separate. It would be awkward to mix the two, she claimed. This meant Jake had been hearing about this amazing mentor for months without ever being introduced, despite Emma supposedly spending 12 hours a week in his apartment. The most impressive part of Emma's deception was how she managed to make Jake feel like he was being unsupportive whenever he expressed concerns. When he suggested they could study together sometimes, Emma reminded him that he didn't work in marketing and wouldn't understand the specialized concepts they were covering. When he offered to quiz her on practice questions, she explained that Marcus had developed a specific teaching methodology that worked best without outside interference. She had an answer for every logical suggestion Jake made. But the real genius of Emma's approach was tapping into Jake's desire to be the encouraging partner. Every time she returned from a study session looking tired or frustrated, she would tell him how challenging the material was and how much she appreciated his patience with her busy schedule. She made him feel like he was contributing to her success just by giving her space to focus on her career goals. Jake found himself actively defending the study arrangement to his own friends when they suggested it seemed excessive. The academic performance theater had been running smoothly for 6 full weeks before the first major crack appeared. Emma had become so comfortable with her routine that she stopped paying attention to the smaller details that made her story believable. Jake started noticing she would turn off her phone during sessions, claiming they needed to focus, but she usually replied to text immediately. More concerning was how she began coming home smelling distinctly of alcohol, claiming Marcus sometimes offered wine to help her relax while studying. For someone who had never been much of a drinker, Emma was apparently discovering some very interesting study techniques. Wine and textbooks don't mix. Jake's first major red flag came when Emma started claiming that Marcus sometimes offered wine to help her relax while studying. Picture this scenario. You're dating someone who suddenly needs alcohol to absorb certification material. Not just a casual glass during dinner, but regular wine consumption as part of their academic routine. Emma explained that the wine helped lower her mental barriers and allowed her to think more creatively about the complex problem-solving scenarios they practiced during study sessions. The frequency of these boozy academic marathons escalated from once per week to twice per week, then settled into a steady pattern of every Tuesday and Thursday evening, plus rotating weekend sessions. Emma would leave their apartment at 7 in the evening and return between 2 and 4 in the morning, explaining that they lost track of time when they really got into the material. She described these marathon sessions as incredibly productive, covering multiple chapters while working through practice scenarios that required hours of detailed analysis. Jake found himself trying to reconcile the image of serious professional development with Emma stumbling through their front door at 3 in the morning, smelling like she had been sampling wines at a tasting event. The contradiction seemed obvious when he thought about it logically. Every professional exam he had ever taken required clear thinking, focused attention, and systematic memorization of factual information. None of those cognitive processes typically improved with alcohol consumption, especially not the amounts Emma seemed to be consuming. Emma had never been much of a drinker during their 2 years together. She would occasionally have a beer at barbecues or a cocktail when they went out for dinner, but she usually stopped after one drink and often complained that alcohol made her sleepy. Jake knew her tolerance was fairly low because she would get giggly and talkative after just half a glass of wine with dinner. Yet somehow, she was now capable of drinking enough wine during study sessions to come home smelling like she had been marinating in it for hours. The mental gymnastics required to believe that certification prep demanded sharing a bottle of wine per session became exhausting for Jake to maintain. He started calculating the alcohol consumption in his head. If Emma was having study sessions 3 times per week and drinking wine at each session, and if she was coming home smelling strongly of alcohol each time, that suggested she was consuming significantly more wine per week than most casual drinkers consumed per month. For someone preparing for a professional certification that could determine her career advancement, this seemed like an unusual study strategy. The pattern of later nights and stronger alcohol smells became impossible to ignore after the first month. Emma would return home not just smelling like wine, but smelling like she had been drinking throughout the evening. Sometimes Jake detected what seemed like different types of alcohol mixed together. When he asked about this, Emma explained that Marcus had an extensive collection that would switch between different drinks depending on which topics they were covering. I started questioning if I'd accidentally started dating a sommelier in training rather than a junior analyst. Jake found himself in the strange position of supporting his girlfriend's career goals while simultaneously watching her develop what appeared to be a drinking problem. Every time he expressed concern about the amount of alcohol involved in these study sessions, Emma would remind him that he had promised to support her professional development. She made him feel like questioning the wine consumption meant he was questioning her commitment to advancing her career. Emma's post-study session condition became increasingly difficult to explain through academic activities alone. She would return home with wine-stained lips, disheveled hair, and clothes that smelled like multiple different alcoholic beverages. Her explanations for these physical signs became more creative over time. The wine stains were from animated discussions where they gestured with their glasses. The disheveled hair resulted from running her hands through it when frustrated with difficult concepts. Jake started paying closer attention to exactly how much studying could apparently make someone smell like they had been working behind a bar all evening. Emma would return home carrying the scent of wine so strongly that it seemed to fill their entire apartment within minutes of her arrival. Her clothes, her hair, her breath, even her skin seemed saturated with alcohol, to a degree that suggested either extremely messy drinking or extremely close contact with someone else who had been drinking just as heavily. Emma's breath, when she returned from study sessions, told a story that didn't match her academic narrative. The smell wasn't just wine or beer. It was the complex bouquet of someone who had been drinking over several hours in close proximity to another person who had been doing exactly the same thing. Jake recognized this particular combination of scents from college parties where couples would spend entire evenings drinking together in private rooms while everyone else assumed they were just having deep conversations. The wine and textbook combination had apparently taught Emma and Marcus far more than any certification program could offer, though the specific subjects they were mastering had very little to do with client management strategies or advanced analytics frameworks. Even some of Marcus's own team members were starting to find this routine bizarre, though Jake wouldn't discover that detail until much later. What he did notice was how Emma had begun undergoing the most remarkable transformation he had ever witnessed in their relationship: the mysterious case of the Unreachable Scholar. This transformation included a complete communication shutdown that left Jake feeling like he was dating a ghost. Emma powered off her phone from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. during every study session, leaving Jake unreachable for hours at a time. She went from being the type of person who would text him photos of her lunch and respond to his messages within minutes, to becoming completely unavailable for 4 to 6 hour stretches multiple times per week. During their first 2 years together, Emma had been incredibly responsive to texts and calls. She would answer Jake's messages even during busy workdays, often sending quick replies between meetings or during bathroom breaks. She had always been the type to share random thoughts throughout the day, sending him memes she found funny or complaining about annoying coworkers via text. This constant communication had become such a normal part of their relationship that Jake often felt like he was carrying on continuous conversations with Emma, even when they were apart. The academic hermit transformation began gradually, but became absolute within the first month of study sessions. Emma would warn Jake before leaving for each session that she was turning off her phone to eliminate distractions. She explained that Marcus had convinced her that modern students fail certification exams because they cannot focus without constant digital interruptions. According to Emma, they had agreed to create a completely phone-free learning environment where both participants would power down their devices for the duration of each session. Emergency contact protocols became a major source of confusion and frustration for Jake. What would happen if his car broke down and he needed Emma to pick him up? What if there was a family emergency requiring immediate communication? I nearly missed a plumbing leak because she wouldn't pick up my 40 texts about water dripping through her ceiling. Emma's response to these practical concerns was that true emergencies were rare and that Jake could handle most situations independently for a few hours. She reminded him that people had managed emergencies long before cell phones existed. Emma's explanation for turning off phones during study sessions centered around research she claimed to have read about digital distractions and learning retention. She told Jake that studies showed even having phones visible during academic work reduced cognitive performance by significant percentages. According to Emma, she and Marcus had committed to creating the optimal learning environment by eliminating all potential technological interruptions. This meant not just silencing phones, but actually powering them down completely to avoid the temptation of checking messages during breaks. The escalating pattern of communication blackouts followed Emma's study schedule exactly every Tuesday and Thursday evening from 7 until sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning. Jake would lose all contact with his girlfriend. Weekend study sessions created similar communication dead zones, though these sometimes lasted even longer since Emma claimed weekend sessions could be more intensive without work obligations the following day. Jake found himself planning his own activities around these predictable periods when Emma would be completely unreachable. The irony of Emma's selective availability became impossible to ignore after several weeks of this pattern. She remained fully accessible during all other activities. She answered texts during work hours, responded to calls during social outings with friends, and even replied to messages during movies or while exercising at the gym. Only academic pursuits with Marcus required complete disconnection from the outside world. Jake started questioning whether Emma's job, hobbies, and other relationships were simply less important than her certification studies, or whether something about these particular sessions demanded absolute privacy. The dedication Emma showed to maintaining communication blackouts seemed excessive even for the most challenging academic material. In Jake's experience working in consulting, no certification prep requires total isolation from the outside world for hours at a time. He had friends who had studied for various professional certifications without requiring complete isolation from their partners for multiple evenings per week. He began researching the specific certification Emma claimed to be pursuing and found no indication that successful candidates typically needed such extreme study conditions. Emma's phone would apparently spring back to life the moment she left Marcus's apartment each evening. Jake noticed that Emma would often text him from her car to let him know she was driving home, indicating that her communication blackout ended precisely when her study session concluded. This suggested Emma was actively monitoring the time and deliberately maintaining the communication barrier only during specific hours. The immediate return to normal responsiveness felt calculated rather than natural. Modern relationship expectations had trained Jake to assume he could reach Emma whenever necessary, making these communication blackouts feel particularly jarring. They lived together and shared daily responsibilities that sometimes required coordination through text messages. Emma's sudden unavailability for regular household communication created practical problems beyond Jake's emotional concerns. He found himself unable to confirm dinner plans, coordinate weekend activities, or even share basic information about their shared living situation during study session hours. Jake began testing the boundaries of Emma's academic isolation by sending messages at different times during her study sessions. He would text early in the evening when sessions were just beginning, hoping to catch Emma before she entered full focus mode. He tried calling during what he assumed might be break periods around 9 or 10 in the evening. He sent messages near midnight, wondering if sessions might be winding down. Every attempt met with complete silence until Emma finally returned home hours later. The true reason behind these communication blackouts started becoming clearer to Jake as he thought about what other activities might require complete privacy from outside contact. What if the phone shutdowns weren't really about protecting academic focus at all? What if they were protecting something that would be much more difficult to explain if interrupted by mistimed calls or messages at particularly inconvenient moments? Jake was about to test this theory in the most innocent way possible. The dinner offer that broke the spell. Jake thought he was being the perfect supportive boyfriend when he came up with what seemed like the most thoughtful gesture imaginable. After watching Emma leave for another marathon study session on a Thursday evening, he realized these hard-working students probably hadn't eaten dinner yet. Here were two dedicated professionals spending their entire evening cramming certification material, likely forgetting to take care of basic human needs like food. Jake decided to surprise them with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, figuring nothing said relationship support quite like making sure your girlfriend didn't starve while pursuing career advancement. The plan seemed foolproof in Jake's mind. He would show up around 9:30 with pad thai, spring rolls, and some of those coconut rice desserts Emma loved. He imagined walking into a scene of scattered textbooks, highlighters, and maybe a whiteboard covered with complex diagrams. Emma and Marcus would look up from their study materials, grateful for the interruption and impressed by Jake's thoughtfulness. They might even invite him to stay for a few minutes while they took a well-deserved food break from their intensive academic work. Jake called Emma around 9:15 to let her know he was planning to stop by with dinner. The phone went straight to voicemail, which he expected given her communication blackout policy during study sessions. He left a cheerful message explaining his dinner delivery plan and drove to the Thai restaurant to pick up enough food for 3 people. The whole drive to Marcus's apartment, Jake felt pleased with himself for finding such a perfect way to show support for Emma's educational goals without being intrusive or demanding her attention. Emma's reaction when Jake called her back 10 minutes later was unlike anything he had experienced in their relationship. Her voice sounded panicked and strangely breathless when she answered, almost like she had been running or engaged in some kind of physical activity. When Jake explained that he was already at the restaurant ordering food for delivery, Emma's response was immediate and intense. She told him absolutely not to come to the apartment under any circumstances. Her tone was so sharp and defensive that Jake initially thought something terrible had happened. Emma claimed that bringing dinner would be distracting and completely derail their progress on a critical section of certification material. According to Emma, she and Marcus had reached a breakthrough moment in understanding complex analytical frameworks, and any interruption would cause them to lose their momentum entirely. She insisted that successful studying required maintaining unbroken concentration for hours at a time, and that even a brief interruption for food would destroy their ability to retain the information they had been working so hard to master. Jake found himself standing in a Thai restaurant parking lot, holding bags of food while his girlfriend explained why bringing dinner to hungry students would somehow sabotage their academic success. Emma was essentially arguing that eating food was incompatible with learning, despite the fact that the human brain requires regular nutrition to function optimally. She claimed that taking a 15-minute break to eat would be more disruptive to their study session than spending the entire evening hungry and distracted by empty stomachs. Emma's defensive reaction escalated when Jake suggested he could simply leave the food at the door without disturbing their study session. She insisted that even knowing food was available outside would create too much temptation for distraction. She claimed that she and Marcus had trained themselves to ignore hunger during intensive study periods, and that acknowledging the presence of food would break their concentration. This explanation required Jake to believe that his girlfriend had developed some kind of advanced meditation technique that allowed her to transcend basic biological needs in service of academic achievement. The conversation revealed the first major structural weakness in Emma's academic cover story. Her overreaction to a simple dinner offer exposed the fact that their study sessions could not withstand any form of outside contact or interruption. Legitimate study groups typically welcome supportive gestures from partners and friends. The fact that Emma treated Jake's thoughtful offer like a threat suggested that something about these sessions required absolute privacy and secrecy. "Sorry for trying to feed you. My bad. I forgot hunger destroys focus," Jake said after Emma finished her frantic explanation. The sarcasm felt justified given how ridiculous the entire conversation had become. He was being made to feel guilty for offering basic human sustenance to people who were supposedly engaged in intensive intellectual work. The phone call ended with Emma practically begging Jake not to come to the apartment, promising that she would explain everything when she got home later that night. She asked him to trust her commitment to her career goals and to understand that some forms of support were more helpful than others. Jake agreed to take the Thai food home and eat it alone, but the entire interaction left him feeling confused and suspicious about what was really happening during these study sessions. The dinner offer incident marked the beginning of Jake's serious doubts about Emma's academic narrative. Her extreme reaction to such a normal, supportive gesture revealed that these study sessions required the kind of privacy typically associated with activities that had nothing to do with professional development. The fact that bringing food to hungry students could somehow threaten their educational progress suggested that Emma and Marcus were engaged in learning experiences that would be difficult to explain to concerned boyfriends bearing takeout containers. Jake realized that evening that he had stumbled onto a fundamental flaw in Emma's elaborate academic charade. Real students welcome food. Real study groups appreciate supportive partners. Real certification preparation doesn't require complete isolation from basic human needs. Emma's panicked reaction to his dinner offer revealed that whatever she and Marcus were doing together required the kind of secrecy that had absolutely nothing to do with advancing anyone's career goals. What explains such freakout over a normal study break? Jake was about to discover that the Coworker revelation plot twist. Jake's entire understanding of Emma's academic situation exploded when he ran into Sylvia from Emma's department at their local coffee shop. Sylvia was one of Emma's colleagues who worked on similar client accounts, and she had always been friendly whenever Jake met her at company events. During their casual conversation, Sylvia mentioned how excited she was about finally getting approval to take the same certification exam Emma had been preparing for. Jake's confusion must have shown on his face because Sylvia immediately asked if everything was okay. The conversation took an interesting turn when Sylvia explained that she and two other female colleagues were also studying for the same certification. She had been hoping to connect with Emma and Marcus about their study sessions for weeks. "You know the sessions they've been having? I've been wanting to join, but thought it was just the two of them," Sylvia said, seeming genuinely puzzled about why Emma hadn't mentioned that other colleagues were also pursuing the same certification. Jake felt like he was hearing about a completely different workplace than the one Emma had described. According to Sylvia, the certification Emma was supposedly preparing for was actually quite popular among junior analysts at their firm. The company even provided study materials and sometimes allowed employees to form official study groups during lunch hours or after work. Sylvia had formed her own study group with the other female colleagues, and they met twice per week at the office after hours, reviewing practice questions and sharing materials. The selectiveness of Emma's academic mentorship became even more bizarre when Sylvia revealed her direct attempts to join their sessions. She had actually approached Marcus about studying together, but his response had been strange and dismissive. "He told me he was too busy for a group, which threw me off," Sylvia explained, looking confused. This seemed particularly odd to her, because Marcus was generally known as someone who was helpful to junior colleagues and had previously participated in department-wide training sessions. Emma's creative explanations for why group studying wouldn't work became the topic of Jake's next conversation with her that evening. When he mentioned running into Sylvia and learning about the other colleagues preparing for the same exam, Emma's reaction was immediate and defensive. She insisted that adding more people to their study sessions would completely disrupt the learning dynamic she and Marcus had established. According to Emma, Marcus had developed a highly personalized teaching approach that was specifically tailored to her learning style. The claim that only Marcus possessed the necessary teaching skills to help Emma succeed struck Jake as particularly ridiculous, given what Sylvia had told him about the certification. This wasn't some obscure technical exam that required specialized expertise. It was a standard industry certification that hundreds of marketing professionals took every year. The study materials were widely available, and the exam content was well documented through official preparation guides and online resources. Jake's follow-up conversation with Sylvia revealed even more concerning details about Emma's exclusive academic arrangement. Sylvia had actually asked Emma directly about joining their study sessions, explaining that she would be happy to contribute her own study materials and share the workload of preparing practice questions. Emma had responded by claiming that their current study methodology was too intensive and focused for additional participants, and that adding more people would dilute the effectiveness of Marcus's teaching approach. The irony of Emma avoiding group study while claiming to prioritize exam success became impossible to ignore once Jake understood the full context. Sylvia's collaborative study group was exactly what most certification guides recommended for optimal preparation, yet Emma had rejected multiple opportunities to participate in this type of productive group learning. From Sylvia's perspective, Emma was making her certification preparation more difficult and less effective by avoiding the collaborative learning opportunities available to her. Emma's insistence on maintaining an exclusive educational arrangement with Marcus raised questions about what made their partnership so special and private. Jake started wondering why Emma needed such personalized attention from Marcus when she could have benefited from the diverse perspectives and shared resources of a larger study group. The fact that she actively avoided other colleagues who were preparing for the same exam suggested that her priorities might not align with actual academic success. The exclusive nature of Emma's study arrangement became even more suspicious when Jake considered Marcus's selective willingness to help. His refusal to assist other colleagues who had requested his guidance seemed inconsistent with his reputation as someone who generally supported professional development. Real mentorship typically involves sharing knowledge with multiple colleagues, not creating secretive one-on-one arrangements that exclude other interested students. Sylvia's genuine confusion about Emma's academic isolation provided Jake with an outside perspective on just how unusual this situation had become. She couldn't understand why Emma would choose to study alone with Marcus when she could have joined a supportive group of female colleagues who were all working toward the same goal. The conversation also revealed that Emma had been actively misleading her colleagues about her study arrangement, providing vague explanations about getting extra help without specific details about why it couldn't be shared. Jake realized that the real reason other students weren't welcome in Emma's study sessions had nothing to do with learning effectiveness or teaching methodology. The exclusive nature of her arrangement with Marcus served to protect activities that would be difficult to explain to colleagues who were genuinely interested in certification preparation. Group study sessions would have required actual academic discussions that could be observed and evaluated by other participants. Emma's academic mentorship with Marcus was apparently so specialized that it couldn't withstand the scrutiny of other students preparing for the same exam. Jake found himself questioning whether these sessions were actually focused on certification preparation or whether they served some other purpose entirely. Something about this whole arrangement felt wrong in ways he couldn't quite articulate yet, but the pieces were starting to form a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see clearly. The great study material mystery. Jake's growing suspicions centered on one glaring inconsistency. Emma claimed Marcus's private collection of study materials was essential for her success, but she never showed Jake a single title or note from these supposedly revolutionary resources. The mystery of Marcus's exclusive study materials became the cornerstone of Emma's entire academic deception. Yet these supposedly essential resources remained completely invisible throughout their entire certification preparation period. Emma described these materials as specialized reference books, industry reports, and proprietary study guides that Marcus had accumulated during his own certification process. According to Emma, these resources were so valuable and comprehensive that studying anywhere else would put her at a significant disadvantage compared to other exam candidates. She painted a picture of Marcus's apartment as this incredible academic library filled with certification materials that simply couldn't be found anywhere else. Jake found himself accepting the idea that professional certification required access to some kind of educational resource monopoly that only Marcus possessed. Emma explained that Marcus had invested thousands of dollars in specialized study materials over the years, including rare industry publications and exclusive practice exams that weren't available through normal channels. She claimed these materials were the secret to Marcus's exceptional performance on his own certification exam, and that his willingness to share access to them was an incredible opportunity that she couldn't waste by studying elsewhere. The apparent scarcity of certification prep materials struck Jake as unusual, given how common professional certifications had become in Emma's industry. He knew that most certification programs provided extensive study guides, practice exams, and reference materials through official channels. The certification body itself offered comprehensive preparation resources, and numerous third-party companies had developed study programs specifically for this exam. Yet Emma insisted that Marcus's private collection contained information and insights that weren't available through any of these standard preparation methods. Emma's claim of exclusive access to common professional resources became increasingly absurd as Jake learned more about the certification she was supposedly pursuing. This wasn't some obscure technical qualification requiring specialized knowledge or rare documentation. The certification was offered multiple times per year to thousands of marketing professionals, with standard study materials readily available through bookstores, online platforms, and professional development programs. The idea that one person had somehow cornered the market on effective preparation resources seemed to defy the basic economics of professional education. Jake's acceptance of this educational resource monopoly demonstrated just how effectively Emma had manipulated his desire to support her career goals. Every time Jake suggested alternative study arrangements, Emma would remind him about the irreplaceable value of Marcus's materials and how studying anywhere else would jeopardize her chances of passing the exam. She made Jake feel like questioning the exclusive nature of these resources meant questioning her commitment to professional advancement and career success. The growing questions about what exactly these materials were became impossible for Jake to ignore after several weeks of hearing about their importance without ever seeing evidence of their existence. Emma never brought home study materials to review. She never mentioned specific books or resources by name. She never described particular insights or information she had gained from accessing Marcus's exclusive collection. The materials seemed to exist only as abstract justifications for why studying had to happen at Marcus's apartment, rather than anywhere else. Jake started paying attention to the complete absence of any academic materials in Emma's daily routine. She didn't carry textbooks or study guides. She didn't have printed notes or highlighted articles. She didn't reference specific chapters or sections of certification material during their conversations about her preparation progress. For someone who claimed to be spending 12 to 15 hours per week studying intensive material, Emma showed remarkably little evidence of actually engaging with any educational content. The irony of digital-age students requiring physical location-specific resources became increasingly apparent as Jake considered the technological reality of modern professional education. Most certification study materials were available through online platforms that could be accessed from any location with internet connectivity. Practice exams could be taken on laptops or tablets. Digital study guides could be downloaded and reviewed anywhere. The claim that effective preparation required physical presence at one specific location seemed to ignore the fundamental nature of contemporary educational resources. Marcus's study materials apparently possessed magical properties that prevented them from being shared or even described in detail to interested colleagues. Emma couldn't explain why she never took notes on her phone about important concepts from these exclusive resources. She couldn't justify why other colleagues preparing for the same exam weren't allowed to at least see what these supposedly superior resources contain. The convenience of unmovable study aids provided Emma with the perfect excuse for maintaining her exclusive arrangement with Marcus while avoiding any requests to make their study resources more accessible to other interested colleagues. Whenever Sylvia or other coworkers asked about joining their study sessions, Emma could cite the logistical impossibility of relocating Marcus's extensive material collection. These resources were apparently so numerous and specialized that they required a dedicated study space that couldn't accommodate additional participants. Jake began wondering what these special materials actually looked like. Since Emma never provided specific descriptions of the books, guides, or resources that were supposedly transforming her understanding of client management and analytical frameworks. She spoke about these materials in vague terms that never included titles, authors, or publishers. She couldn't recommend specific resources to colleagues who asked about effective study methods. She couldn't even describe the general organization or format of the materials that were apparently so crucial to her exam preparation success. The mystery deepened when Jake realized that Emma's study progress never seemed to correlate with the incredible resources she claimed to be accessing. After weeks of studying with Marcus's exclusive materials, Emma couldn't demonstrate improved knowledge of certification topics during casual conversations. She couldn't explain complex concepts she had supposedly mastered through access to superior study resources. She couldn't describe insights or understanding she had gained that other students preparing through standard methods might be missing. If these materials were so exclusive and transformative, why couldn't Emma point to a single chapter or concept she had mastered? The complete absence of visible study aids, combined with the secrecy surrounding their content and the impossibility of sharing them with other interested students, was starting to paint a very different picture of what was really happening during those late-night sessions. Jake was beginning to suspect that some hands-on field research might be the only way to get real answers about Emma's mysterious academic arrangement. The apartment surveillance mission. Jake reached his breaking point and decided to conduct some field research of his own on Emma's academic activities. He figured the best approach would be showing up at Marcus's apartment with coffee and pastries, presenting himself as the thoughtful boyfriend who wanted to fuel their late-night study session. Jake picked up a box of assorted donuts and 2 large coffees from the shop near Marcus's building, planning to surprise the dedicated students with caffeinated support for their certification cramming. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to surprise people who theoretically should have been expecting visitors if they were genuinely engaged in normal academic activities. Jake knocked on the apartment door at exactly 10:15 in the evening, figuring this would be a perfect time to catch the study session in full swing without interrupting any critical learning moments. The response to his knock was immediate silence, which struck him as odd, given that he expected to hear voices discussing analytical frameworks or the rustling of textbook pages. He waited 30 seconds and knocked again, this time calling out that he had brought coffee and snacks for the hardworking students. The delay in response stretched to nearly 3 full minutes, during which Jake could hear muffled conversation and what sounded like rapid movement inside the apartment. Marcus finally opened the door looking completely flustered and slightly out of breath, as if he had been running around the apartment or engaged in some kind of strenuous physical activity. His hair was disheveled and his shirt was wrinkled and partially untucked, which seemed like an unusual appearance for someone who had supposedly been sitting at a desk studying certification materials for the past 3 hours. Marcus's greeting was awkward and uncomfortable, with him repeatedly saying, "Oh, hey," and "this isn't really a good time," while blocking the doorway and clearly trying to prevent Jake from seeing inside the apartment. Jake immediately noticed the complete absence of any visible study materials in the areas of the apartment he could see from the doorway. No books, no notes, only that open wine bottle and a paused romantic comedy on the television screen. The coffee table was completely clear except for the wine in 2 glasses that appeared to have been recently used. The television displayed what appeared to be a romantic movie that had been paused mid-scene, which seemed like an unusual choice for background entertainment during intensive academic work. The apartment's atmosphere felt more like the aftermath of a date night than the middle of a serious study session. Jake could smell wine in the air, creating an ambiance that was decidedly more romantic than academic. The lighting was dim to levels that would make reading textbooks practically impossible. Yet, Marcus continued insisting that he and Emma had been deep in certification preparation when Jake arrived. The transparent attempts to prevent Jake from entering the apartment became increasingly obvious as Marcus positioned himself to block the doorway while making excuses about the apartment being messy and not suitable for visitors. Jake's confusion about the lack of academic environment grew as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing with Emma's detailed descriptions of their intensive study sessions. Where were the reference books Emma had mentioned? Where was the whiteboard Marcus supposedly used to diagram complex concepts? Where were the printed practice exams and highlighted study guides that had justified weeks of exclusive academic collaboration? The apartment looked like 2 people had been relaxing together rather than engaging in the kind of focused professional development Emma had described. The awkward conversation continued as Marcus made increasingly desperate attempts to explain why Jake couldn't come inside and why this wasn't a good time for visitors. Marcus claimed that Emma was in the bathroom and that their study materials were spread out in a way that would be disturbed by having additional people in the apartment. These explanations sounded rehearsed and unconvincing, especially given the complete absence of any visible evidence that studying had been taking place. Jake found himself staring at an apartment that looked like the setting for a romantic evening rather than an academic workspace. Jake started asking direct questions about their study session, including which certification topics they had been covering and how their preparation was progressing. Marcus's responses were vague and evasive, lacking the specific details someone would naturally provide after spending hours working through complex material. Marcus couldn't describe which practice problems they had been solving or which concepts they had been reviewing. His answers felt like someone trying to remember lines from a script rather than someone genuinely engaged in academic work. The growing evidence that this wasn't an academic environment became impossible to ignore as Jake noticed more details about the apartment setup. The wine bottle was expensive and nearly empty, suggesting that serious drinking had been happening rather than casual sipping during study breaks. The television showed a romantic movie that had been paused at what appeared to be an intimate scene between the main characters. The apartment's temperature was warm and the air felt close, like two people had been spending time in very close proximity to each other for extended periods. Jake realized he was witnessing the difference between what study spaces actually look like versus what date night environments look like, and Marcus's apartment clearly fell into the latter category. Real study sessions involved books, notes, highlighters, and the kind of organized chaos that comes from people actually working through academic material. This apartment showed no evidence of intellectual work, but plenty of evidence of two people spending intimate time together in a private setting designed for comfort and romance rather than learning. Marcus's panic was becoming more obvious as he realized he couldn't maintain the academic charade much longer, and Jake's determination to understand what was really happening during these study sessions was about to receive the definitive answer he had been seeking for weeks. The sound of footsteps from the back of the apartment signaled that Emma was about to emerge from wherever she had been hiding during this increasingly uncomfortable conversation. The bedroom scholar revelation. What happened next became the moment that transformed weeks of suspicion into undeniable reality, and Jake found himself face to face with an educational methodology that had absolutely nothing to do with professional certification. Emma finally appeared in the hallway leading from the bedroom, and her unconventional study attire immediately revealed the true nature of their academic collaboration. She was wearing nothing but Marcus's oversized button-down shirt, which barely covered her thighs and was obviously something she had grabbed quickly to make herself presentable. Her hair was completely disheveled in a way that suggested hours of physical activity rather than hunched concentration over textbooks. Her face showed the unmistakable flush and slightly dazed expression of someone who had been engaged in intensive physical exercise rather than mental exercise. The unique approach to certification preparation that Emma and Marcus had developed apparently involved studying human anatomy in ways that traditional academic programs never covered. Jake found himself staring at his girlfriend of 2 years, wearing another man's clothing in a context that made their supposed focus on client management strategy seem laughably inadequate as an explanation. Emma's appearance told the complete story of what these study sessions had actually entailed, and no amount of creative explanation could transform this visual evidence into legitimate professional development. Emma's immediate reaction was to stammer that she had borrowed the shirt because hers was in the wash. But her flustered delivery made the excuse sound even more ridiculous than it already was. She insisted that this isn't what it looks like, though she couldn't provide any alternative explanation that would make sense given the circumstances. The attempt to maintain the study session narrative despite overwhelming visual evidence required a level of commitment to deception that bordered on performance art. She claimed they had been taking a break from studying when Jake arrived, which explained why she was in the bedroom rather than reviewing certification material. Jake's documentation of this alternative learning method began when he pulled out his phone and started recording the scene unfolding in Marcus's apartment. The video captured Emma standing in the hallway, wearing Marcus's shirt while Marcus stood nearby, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Jake asked the obvious question that cut through all the elaborate explanations Emma was providing. He looked directly at the camera and said, "So this is studying?" The question highlighted the absurd contrast between Emma's academic narrative and the reality of finding her emerging from another man's bedroom, wearing his clothes. The panic and damage control attempts from both scholars began immediately after Jake started recording. Emma desperately pleaded with him to stop filming, claiming that he was violating her privacy and that recording without consent was inappropriate. Marcus tried to position himself between Jake and Emma, attempting to block the camera while simultaneously trying to convince Jake that everything had innocent explanations. Both of them seemed to understand that video documentation of their study session would be difficult to explain to anyone who might see it later. Marcus's confession about the duration of their educational collaboration revealed the specific timeline Jake had been trying to piece together for weeks. When Jake pressed for details about exactly how long this had been going on, Marcus admitted about a month now, confirming that these tutoring sessions had evolved beyond traditional mentorship into more hands-on learning experiences. The timeline Marcus provided aligned perfectly with when Emma's study sessions had become more frequent and intensive, and when her behavior had started showing the most obvious changes. Jake's realization that he was witnessing the most expensive tutoring session in history began to sink in as he calculated the real cost of Emma's alternative education program. She had been paying for this specialized instruction not with money, but with their relationship, their shared living situation, and their plans for the future. Marcus had been providing his educational services in exchange for access to curriculum that had nothing to do with professional advancement and everything to do with personal satisfaction. The tutoring arrangement had apparently been mutually beneficial for both teacher and student in ways that traditional academic programs couldn't match. The ultimate confrontation Jake had been avoiding for weeks finally arrived as he processed the complete breakdown of trust that Emma's educational pursuits represented. Everything she had told him about certification preparation, career advancement, and professional development had been elaborate fiction designed to create plausible explanations for regular, intimate encounters with Marcus. The study sessions, the wine consumption, the communication blackouts, the exclusive materials, and the privacy requirements had all been carefully constructed elements of a deception that allowed Emma to maintain her relationship with Jake while pursuing her educational interests with Marcus. Jake's statement that marked the end of their relationship was simple and direct. "We're done," he told Emma, his voice cutting through her desperate attempts to explain the situation. The video evidence he had captured made further discussion pointless, and the elaborate academic charade Emma had maintained for weeks had finally collapsed under the weight of undeniable visual proof. Jake realized that supporting Emma's career goals had actually meant enabling her to pursue extracurricular activities that had nothing to do with advancing her professional prospects. The real curriculum these students had been following during their private tutoring sessions involved subjects that weren't covered in any professional certification program, though both participants had apparently been dedicated pupils who attended classes regularly and showed remarkable enthusiasm for their coursework. Emma and Marcus had been studying each other with the kind of intensive focus that actual students rarely bring to legitimate academic material, and their educational collaboration had produced learning outcomes that were completely different from what Jake had been led to expect from their certification preparation program. Jake walked toward the door while Emma shouted behind him, her voice becoming increasingly frantic as she realized the full scope of what had just been documented. The academic performance review, the family report card. Jake made a decision that would transform Emma's private academic scandal into a very public family discussion about educational standards and moral expectations. He realized that Emma's parents had been financially supporting what they believed was their daughter's commitment to professional development, paying portions of her rent and student loans while she supposedly dedicated herself to career advancement through intensive studying. These deeply religious parents had welcomed Jake into their family. They'd hosted me countless times, treated me like family. They deserved to know exactly what kind of academic program their money had been funding and what type of studying their daughter had actually been pursuing during those late-night sessions. The video Jake had recorded at Marcus's apartment became Emma's official report card, and he decided her parents needed to see their daughter's actual academic performance rather than the fictional progress report she had been providing during family dinners. Emma's mother had been so proud when Emma first announced her certification plans, telling relatives and friends at church about her daughter's dedication to advancing her marketing career. Emma's father had specifically increased his monthly financial support to help cover the extra expenses associated with Emma's educational pursuits, believing he was investing in his daughter's professional future. Emma's panic about her academic performance being reviewed by family members reached hysteria levels when Jake informed her that he was sharing the evidence of her alternative study methods with the people who had been financially supporting her educational goals. She immediately started crying and begging Jake not to involve her parents, claiming that her relationship with them was private and that he had no right to interfere with family dynamics. Emma insisted that what happened between her and Marcus was between consenting adults, and that dragging her religious parents into the situation would only cause unnecessary pain and drama. Jake's response was that Emma's parents had every right to know what their financial support was actually funding, especially since they had been contributing to what they believed was legitimate professional development. He pointed out that Emma had accepted money from her family under false pretenses, essentially defrauding people who trusted her to use their support responsibly. The fact that Emma's parents were deeply Catholic made the deception even more problematic, since they had been unknowingly subsidizing behavior that directly contradicted their fundamental moral beliefs about relationships and fidelity. The cascading consequences of Jake's academic disclosure began within hours of him sending the video to Emma's family. Emma's mother called first, sobbing and asking, "Is that really my daughter?" The confusion and heartbreak in her voice made it clear that Emma's academic narrative had completely collapsed under the weight of visual evidence. Emma's father called 30 minutes later, his voice shaking with anger and disappointment as he processed the reality of how his financial support had been utilized. Emma's siblings also received copies of their sister's report card, and their reactions ranged from shock to disgust as they realized the extent of Emma's deception. Her younger brother, who had looked up to Emma as the successful college graduate who was advancing her career through hard work and dedication, felt personally betrayed by discovering that his role model had been living a completely different reality. Emma's older sister, who had defended Emma's busy study schedule to concerned relatives, felt embarrassed about having supported lies that made the entire family look foolish. The family's disappointment in their star student's curriculum choices became apparent through a series of phone calls that lasted throughout the evening. Emma's parents had been bragging to their church congregation about their daughter's commitment to professional development and her mature approach to career advancement. They had used Emma as an example of how their parenting had produced a responsible young woman who was focused on building a successful future. Learning that their example of family values had actually been pursuing a completely different type of education left them questioning everything they thought they knew about their daughter. Emma's father's threat to cut off financial support represented the first concrete consequence of her alternative academic program. He told Emma that he would not continue paying for her living expenses if she was using their family's money to support behavior that violated everything they had taught her about relationships and moral conduct. The monthly payments that had allowed Emma to afford her apartment and maintain her lifestyle suddenly became contingent on her demonstrating the kind of character her parents had thought they were already supporting. The complete collapse of Emma's academic cover story happened during a family conference call that included her parents, siblings, and Jake. Emma tried desperately to maintain elements of her original narrative, claiming that her relationship with Marcus had developed unexpectedly during legitimate study sessions and that she had never intended to deceive anyone about her academic goals. Her family members took turns expressing their disappointment and confusion about how someone they had trusted could construct such elaborate lies while accepting their financial and emotional support. Emma's siblings' reactions created the most dramatic shift in family dynamics. Initially, they had called Jake an asshole for interfering in their sister's personal life, defending Emma's right to privacy, and accusing him of being controlling and vindictive. But after seeing the video evidence of Emma's actual study sessions, their tune changed completely. Her brother went from defending Emma's academic dedication to expressing disgust at how she had manipulated everyone who cared about her. Her sister transformed from Emma's biggest supporter to someone who could barely look at the sister she thought she knew. The family support that Emma had taken for granted throughout her adult life evaporated within a single evening as her real report card revealed academic performance that had nothing to do with professional certification. Her parents' financial assistance stopped immediately. Her siblings' respect disappeared completely, and the family relationships Emma had expected to maintain, regardless of her personal choices, became casualties of her educational fraud. But the true cost of Emma's expensive education was only beginning to reveal itself. The ultimate academic consequences. Emma's workplace became ground zero for the most spectacular career implosion anyone at the consulting firm had witnessed in recent memory. Sylvia, who had been trying to join their exclusive study group for weeks, suddenly understood why her request had been rejected so consistently. She also realized that she needed to inform their supervisor about the true nature of the academic collaboration that had been happening between Emma and Marcus. The company's human resources department received a detailed report about the inappropriate relationship, complete with evidence that studying had not been the primary focus of their after-hours meetings. The consulting firm's response was swift and decisive once HR understood the full scope of the situation. Marcus faced immediate termination from his position due to his violation of company policies regarding relationships with subordinates. Being a senior analyst, he technically held authority over Emma's work assignments and performance evaluations, making the relationship a clear violation of workplace conduct policies that created potential liability issues for the company. Emma's request for a transfer to a different team was denied when the company decided that termination was the more appropriate response to her conduct. Marcus's qualifications as an academic mentor became the subject of intense scrutiny once the human resources investigation began. The discovery that this expert educator wasn't even qualified for the subject he claimed to be teaching added another layer of deception to an already complicated situation. Marcus had apparently exaggerated his expertise about the certification Emma was supposedly pursuing. He had passed a different certification exam several years earlier, but he had never actually completed the specific program Emma claimed to be studying. His credentials as a tutor were about as legitimate as Emma's commitment to academic achievement. The personal consequences extended far beyond the office walls as word got back to Marcus's wife, who then contacted the firm's HR department with additional concerns about her husband's teaching methods. Marcus found himself trying to explain to his spouse why his mentorship responsibilities required such intimate teaching techniques and why his student needed to attend lessons wearing his clothing. His wife's reaction to these educational explanations was swift and decisive, resulting in divorce proceedings that would cost Marcus significantly more than any professional certification program. Emma's certification program had somehow managed to end multiple careers instead of advancing them, creating a level of professional destruction that seemed almost impressive in its thoroughness. Marcus lost his job, his marriage, and his reputation within the industry where he'd been building his career for nearly a decade. Emma's career prospects at her current company disappeared entirely, and the academic partnership that had seemed so mutually beneficial suddenly became a liability that neither participant could afford to maintain. The workplace environment that Emma and Marcus had, disrupted through their educational collaboration, became a cautionary tale that spread throughout their professional network. Other employees learned about the consequences of mixing personal relationships with career advancement, and the story became a reminder about why companies maintain strict policies about supervisor-subordinate relationships. The consulting firm used the incident as an example during harassment prevention training, demonstrating how inappropriate workplace relationships could destroy careers and create legal liability for employers. Emma's family's reaction to her academic performance created additional consequences that extended beyond her professional life. Her parents' decision to withdraw financial support left Emma struggling to maintain her lifestyle while simultaneously dealing with unemployment and career uncertainty. The religious values that had shaped her upbringing made her parents' disappointment particularly painful, as they felt that Emma had violated fundamental principles about honesty and faithfulness that they had worked to instill throughout her childhood and young adulthood. The social consequences of Emma's alternative education program rippled through her personal and professional networks in ways that traditional academic failures never could. Friends and colleagues who had supported her career goals felt deceived when they learned about the true nature of her study sessions. The elaborate lies Emma had constructed to maintain her academic charade had involved numerous people who now questioned their ability to trust her judgment or her word about anything significant. Emma's tuition payments for her alternative education program included losing Jake's support and companionship, forfeiting her parents' financial assistance and emotional trust, and sacrificing her career stability for a few months of physical satisfaction. Marcus paid similar costs, trading his marriage, his job, and his professional standing for the opportunity to provide specialized tutoring services that had nothing to do with legitimate academic instruction. The final grades for everyone involved in this educational experiment revealed failing marks across every category that mattered for long-term success and happiness. Emma received failing grades in relationship management, family trust, professional conduct, and career planning. Marcus failed in marriage maintenance, workplace ethics, career preservation, and honest communication. The academic experiment had concluded with results that demonstrated just how expensive some types of learning can become when the curriculum involves betraying everyone who trusts and supports your supposed educational goals. Jake, despite being the victim of Emma's deception, learned the most valuable lesson from this entire situation. He discovered that when something feels wrong, despite having perfectly reasonable explanations, those instincts usually deserve more attention than the elaborate stories designed to quiet them. His experience taught him that supporting someone's career goals shouldn't require ignoring obvious red flags or accepting explanations that sound professional but don't match observable reality. The ultimate payoff from Emma's certification program was the complete destruction of everything she had worked to build during her adult life, exchanged for a brief period of physical satisfaction that cost her far more than any legitimate education ever could. But for Jake, the real education came from learning to trust his gut when professional explanations started sounding too convenient and academic dedication began looking suspiciously like something else entirely. This story perfectly illustrates 3 massive red flags that should have ended the charade immediately. Late nights until 3 a.m., complete phone blackouts during sessions, and coming home reeking of wine. The biggest lesson from Jake's experience is trusting your gut when explanations sound professional but feel wrong. When someone needs wine to study, can't be reached during academic sessions, and gets defensive about dinner deliveries, those aren't signs of dedication to career advancement. There's a difference between supporting someone's legitimate goals and enabling elaborate deception. Supporting real career growth means encouraging transparency and reasonable boundaries. Enabling deception means accepting explanations that sound good but make no practical sense. Tell us in the comments, what scream loud enough red flag have you missed in your own relationships? If you've ever had a gut feeling you ignored,